You have such a fascinating story. In many ways, it seems you were born to be a film composer. You started playing piano at an early age, and recitals, and just being a performer. Became a way of life for you. So what was your relationship with music, and how did it take over your life?
It's a good question. I definitely started playing when I was really young, and it's sort of that mystery of like how we first get, when we're young, what draws our attention. I was definitely attracted to music, and in some ways, I've talked about this in the past, but it was really seeing Chariots of Fire, that film, that led me to go to the piano and try to figure out how to play that Vangelis theme music.
Right.
And I remember asking my mom for piano lessons, and for me, so for sure, film and TV music was always kind of linked with music in some ways. But I became a classical pianist, and I used to play at like our school assemblies, and I was always playing the piano. And I did start doing some public performing. I think I gave my first public concert when I was 10 in New York. So I was definitely in that zone, and I loved it. I think it's interesting though, because as time goes on, I think your relationship with music is always, and our relationship with everything is always sort of evolving. Right. And when I was in high school, I think I started asking myself questions of like, what was the nature of my work with music? Was it performing? Was it classical piano? Was it jazz? Because I started doing some jazz in high school. Was it composing? Was it what was it? Right. And I did not have an answer to that question. And I think we're always figuring out the answer to that question in some ways. So it continued evolving, but for sure, performing was always a big part of my life.
So as your commitment to pursuing it deepened, what came naturally to you, and what did you see as something you needed to really work at?
It's interesting. I think that with composing specifically, I guess growing up, you study these almost like superhuman figures of especially classical music, where there's people who are like, let's say Bach or Mozart or Beethoven. They're so larger than life in some ways that it's almost like impossible to think that you even have any relation to that tradition. And I think in some ways it's just through practice and through the work of writing music a lot that I started thinking of myself as possibly, maybe I am a composer. It wasn't that I set out to write music almost consciously. It was that I just found myself writing music so much that I guess it was almost like looking back. I said to myself, I guess I'm a composer because I spent all my time writing music. So, and it was really college that was the time period that happened for me. It was, I went to Harvard, and while I was there, two really important things happened for me. One was I joined a hip-hop band that friends of mine had started, and it was called the Witness Protection Program, and I spent,
great name.
Thank you, WPP, and I spent, most of college really focused on this band, and we would perform and tour. It was a 8-person band, so it was 6 instrumentalists and 2 rappers.
Wow.
And I wrote a lot of the music, and I would play keys and synthesizers. And so I was, every day for hours a day I was making beats and producing tracks. And then at the same time, basically, I met a dear friend of mine, Nick Lavelle, who tragically passed away a few years ago. But he was a brilliant director, and he asked me just on a lark, he just said, would you like to score a film? Because I'm making my first feature film, and do you want to just try to figure this out together? Mm-hmm. And I said absolutely. And I had bought a Korg Triton keyboard, like a 61 key Triton, and I was using the sequencer to make a lot of beats and tracks, and so I actually started using that to score Nick's first film. And I just spent years diving into that and the technology of that, and trying to figure out how to make stuff sound as good as it could, and experimenting with film too. That was something that we really focused on. I guess was neither of us really knew what we were doing. All we knew was that we loved movies and we loved music, and so as he would shoot scenes and try to edit them together, I would just sit with him and play around with things. Say, well, what if I did that or what? And there were no rules. It was just, how does that work? Is that ridiculous? And that was the process in some ways. So those years at college were so focused on both of those avenues, and it was during that period of time where I started maybe getting more confidence in myself that this could be something that you could spend your life focusing on.
Right. You studied at Harvard. You studied at Juilliard. At what point did the ASCAP film scoring workshop enter the picture, and what did that provide you? What opportunities or sort of takeaways did you get out of that experience that you couldn't really have gotten anywhere else?
It was hugely impactful for me. I had always, everything I had done with film and music had always been just by instinct and by practice with directors, which is in some ways the way to get the real work done, is to sit there and spend hours and hours experimenting. But that being said, I think there was something about the forum of the ASCAP Columbia workshop that really changed my thought process with regard to the process of scoring. And I'll be even more specific, which is that I did it in, I think it was 2012. I think it was 2012 that I did the ASCAP Columbia workshop. And the first thing that was great about it was just getting the opportunity to be paired with, upcoming directors who are making their films at Columbia, and to be able to have this, real multi-week, I think it was a few months, where we were meeting every week, and we would in a group session kind of go over the things we'd written, talk about what worked. And Alex Steyermark was the director of that program when I was there, and I remember bringing a piece that I'd written for this one sequence in the film that I was scoring with Sarah Varibedian, who was the director. And I thought it was good. I remember thinking it worked. I thought it was nice. And Alex, after I played it for the class, Alex was kind of like, is that really like the best music for that sequence? And it was interesting because it was such a good question. What is the best music for a scene? And it's not just like, does something work? Because there's lots of things that work. I think there's another level of the interaction of the music and the picture where it's really a question of like, is this really saying something here, and what are we supposed to be saying, and how does that affect your experience? And no joke, I mean, that was a real moment of change for me, of just every moment in a project thinking about like, what is the right, and I ask myself that all the time, because I've always felt there's like sort of infinite possible scores for things. I mean, there's you could do anything, as long as you and the director are on the same page, you can do anything. And yet there are certain things that you do that have a special type of connection, both for you and your collaboration with the director, and also for the way that other people might interact with it. And those are the things I think that we're searching for. And so I definitely credit ASCAP Columbia Workshop all day long with that sort of moment of realization. And I've, like I said, I've continued to think about that question all the time. So Alex, thank you.
Great. He's done a lot of great work over the years.
That's amazing. Yeah.
So speaking of directors, in the past 5 years, you've worked with some of the best filmmakers working today, and some of the most provocative, namely Steve McQueen and Barry Jenkins. Was that by chance or by design? Like, how did you happen to start working with some of these incredible artists?
I'm still in awe that I've gotten the opportunity to work with them, and I'm in awe of both of them as well. I think it's really, in some ways, it's just luck and chance that brought all of us together. I became friends with Jeremy Kleiner, who is the producer of one of the producers of 12 Years a Slave and Moonlight, and we had just had sort of a conversation over the years about music. He's a big music fan, and he knew I was in a band, and so I'd send him tracks I was working on sometimes. But I think when I first met Jeremy, I didn't even know what he did for a living, which is sort of just the interesting thing about when you're, I live in New York, and I was going out to LA on the search for work and trying to grab coffee with people to see if there were any film projects people might need music for. But along the way, you develop these very close friendships with people. And it was through Jeremy that one day he mentioned 12 Years a Slave and sent me the script. And actually, it was more of an inquiry of like, I'd love your thoughts on the type. There's going to be a lot of music in the film. I'd love your thoughts on just anything in regard to that. And after I read the script, I just remember being completely blown away by it. Yeah. And I said to Jeremy, even if it's the smallest possible way, I would do anything to help. Happy here to help, anything you need. And so he said, well, can you write, just send me an email with some of your thoughts. So I wrote this 5-paragraph essay email, all these ideas, and he forwarded it to Steve, and Steve called about 12 hours later or something like that.
Wow, that's incredible.
And so that's how I met Steve, and I met Barry and I met Adam McKay through Jeremy as well.
Wow.
So it was all, I developed a very close working relationship with Jeremy and with Dee Dee Gardner, who are the two co-presidents of Plan B Entertainment, and we have, they've become some of my dearest friends, collaborators, and I think it's such a special thing. I think it's everyone's dream to find people that you can work closely with and where you share artistic vision for things, and you trust each other, and you want to hear their thoughts on things and explore things, and so I feel incredibly lucky to be able to work with these directors, but also to have met Jeremy and Dee Dee.
Yeah. So for 12 Years a Slave, you mentioned that you were able to work on spirituals and work songs, and how did you approach being able to do all that? Did you have to do research and listen to a lot of stuff, and just maybe tell us a little bit about how that process worked for you?
It was an incredible amount of research, and it was only through the collaboration with Steve that I could have even begun to approach that. Steve had very specific instincts with how he wanted to approach the music in the world of 12 Years a Slave, and there were really two kind of paths. One was the music, which was really an evolution from Western European tradition, which is sort of the fiddle tunes, the violin music, things like that, because the protagonist, Solomon Northup, is a violinist. And the first question was really that question of what music would an African-American violinist have played in 1841 in New York State, which is a very specific question. And we did a lot of research on that, and were able to hone it down to certain types of Scotch-Irish violin tradition. And so there was a lot of music in that vein, and there is sheet music available for some of that, because if it's descended from a Western tradition, there's much more of a notation tradition there. The music in the South, especially the field songs or things that would have been more of an oral tradition, that was a much more complex process, and the research really involved things like figuring out what is possible to know about that music. And then one of the things that I really learned from Steve was just thinking about what's possible to know, and then also what are the things that we might have to imagine for the film. And then the next level of thinking about, well, for a particular scene, what's actually the sound that we need dramatically for the film too. So there's all those layers of research and figuring out the knowledge base, but then also it's a work of art. So then that was something really, in a collaboration with Steve, of saying, okay, well, for example, in this sequence, should the music be saying, even if it's on-camera music, it's a choice of what that is and how it's potentially subconsciously commenting on things. So, is it in counterpoint to what's happening? How does that play? So that was the nature of that collaboration, yeah.
So another great collaboration is with Barry Jenkins. He seems like such a visionary, focused sort of artist. How gratifying is it to work with someone that has such a sharp vision and such a,
Barry's amazing. He's incredibly inspiring, and, you just don't even want to leave the studio, because we have so much fun exploring things and trying things out, and I can't say enough about that collaboration I have with him, because I think both of us approach things in a similar way, which is really, we have certain early instincts with what the music might be for something, but I think neither of us really knows what the right answer is, and what we love to do is experiment and try things out. And that's really the joy of this process, I think, for any project, which is that you do it because you don't know what's ahead of you.
Right.
And if it was the same thing, we wouldn't want to do it, because they would get old.
Right.
So every movie, every project is different, and I think that's what excites us. So the best way I could describe it is that it's this sort of joyful searching and aesthetic searching that we're doing.
Yeah.
And I'm doing my best to, I guess, fulfill what I imagine to be Barry's emotional vision for the film. Right. Which is something that you come to through conversation, through experiment, through close work, where Barry loves to come to my studio here in New York, and we'll just sit in there for hours on end, days on end,
right.
and explore things together. And it's through that very close work, I think, that you try to get to a place where things feel like they're really connecting to the film, because whether it's on Moonlight or Beale Street, for example, where I'm following Barry's early instincts. On Beale Street, for example, he had this early instinct that he said to me, he said, I think I'm hearing like brass and horns for this movie.
Yeah.
And so, I take that and then I say, okay, well, let me imagine, I'm from New York. I was thinking to myself, okay, does New York have a sound? Like, how am I going to think about this? And I sort of started writing pieces for trumpets and flugelhorns and cornet, French horns, and in a way I was actually I was mixing a more almost like 19th century chamber music style of writing,
right,
with 20th century jazz harmonies, going into not just seventh chords but ninth and 11th and 13th chords, really sort of exploring the limits of that, but where it would hopefully all feel harmonious.
Right.
And that was those were those early experiments, but I wouldn't have done that if Barry hadn't said to me, horns.
Right.
If he had said to me, I don't know, I'm thinking oboes, or I'm thinking, percussion, then I would do in a whole other direction. So that's the great thing, and I think there's a broader story there too, which is the fact that films, or television series, or whatever it is, I think they provide this wonderful kind of focus,
right,
for creation.
Right.
And I find that something that's very, creatively useful in some ways, where it gives you this, it says, here's almost like an assignment. Here's this interesting question we're trying to solve, which is, here's this world, here are these characters, what should that sound like,
right,
And I just think that's awesome, because
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what that sounds like,
You're an Oscar nominee, you've worked on some Oscar-winning films. How does it being recognized at that level of your industry, how does that affect you, either artistically or just personally?
That's a good question. I mean, it's crazy. I had no... I'm not even sure I really fully can understand it, frankly, because I think growing up and loving movies and loving music in movies, that definitely always seemed like something that was sort of like not even possible. So, you look at that and, growing up, you see like the John Williamses and, Danny Elfmans of the world, etc. And so being able to be a part of this community and being able to participate in that is a dream.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't quite feel real, I would say. So I'm not used to that in any form. So I think I would say I'm just honored to be able to be a part of that. And to work with these directors, to work with Steve or Adam or Barry, right, and on anything, I think is like blessing.
Yeah.
And so long way of saying I am completely unable to even come to terms with being able to do it.
Articulate properly.
Yeah.
So let's talk about something a little closer to home. The second season of Succession,
sure,
is well underway, and it's another successful collaboration with Adam McKay. How did you first start working with Adam, and why has that led to such a fruitful partnership with him?
Adam's amazing. I mean, he's definitely the funniest person I've ever met, and he has an incredibly brilliant and wide-ranging intellect, where he has this incredible stand-up comedic writing ability, but also he has a true passion for trying to figure out a way to bring his abilities and his interests and focus them on works that say something about where we are. And actually, in some ways, I would say all the directors, I think, that I've had very close collaborations with are drawn to that too. So everyone has their own lens. Adam's lens has definitely, over the previous years, been very focused on American politics and on the financial crisis in these last two stories. And then with Succession, it's interesting because it's very focused on, the concentrations of power and wealth, and then focused on the media industry.
So as a New York-based composer, it must be fun to work on a story like Succession, which is based in New York, and it, features such sweeping drama and characters that are so unique to, Manhattan and New York City.
Yeah.
Do you feel like, having spent much of your life in New York City, that you have some additional insight into the story that he's telling?
Well, the show is shot all over the world, actually, which is one of the amazing. But it is such a New York show, and I think growing up here and I can tell how legit that is. You do have that sort of fabric of the city in the show, and it is fun. I mean, I think there's both. I've talked about how there's both this sort of gravitas to the show and also this very heightened absurdity that the show has, which is a lot of fun to write music for. But it's I think in combination with Adam and with Jesse Armstrong, who's the creator of the show and the showrunner, I think it has been one of the great experiences that I've ever had to work on it, and TV is also something very new for me. This is the first series I've ever worked on. Getting a chance to try these ideas out over a really, really long canvas like that, where it's, instead of 2 hours, you're dealing with 10 hours per season. And thinking about what do we do with the music, and how do I make sure that I'm still doing something interesting in episode 8. Those are big questions.
Does it present opportunities musically that you just don't have on a film with a
it's different.
Finite arc of the story.
No, it's definitely different. I mean, I think the nature of coming back to certain ideas is something that you do in a film, but in a television series, you have a whole other opportunity with that, and that has been something where I think one of the interesting pleasures maybe with the series is that they have been very excited about having the music as a real part of the fabric of the show. And so I've had this fun opportunity to evolve the music and have it kind of live with these characters sometimes in a way. So that's been something that I think over the course of 2 hours, you just don't get that much time to do those things. And seeing how the show evolves, seeing how the characters evolve, and seing how the music kind of parallels with that is something that's been really gratifying.
So let's take the main title theme, for example. Is that something that Adam just said, "Give me what you got," or did you have like a dialogue with him and he sort of like laid out his vision for what this whole story was going to be?
It's interesting. I started talking to Adam about Succession before they shot the pilot, and I was able to attend some of the shooting for the pilot and go on set and see things being made in real time, and I had thought of some ideas, and I remember putting together sort of grouping of early things that I wanted to show Adam and Jesse, and it was while they were shooting the pilot, I remember having Jesse come over to my studio, and I presented some of these early ideas, and it was a range of things. It was everything from some of these like detuned pianos and beats to I had these weird bells that for some reason I kept working with. There was this, I remember there's a sequence in the pilot where this guy comes in and he wants to like sage the office, or something like that. And I thought that was, I was like, what if we put like a weird Zen bell there? there, just doing these weird bent bells and things. So we started playing with those things, and Jesse was drawn to all of these ideas, and he really liked the sort of juxtaposition of these sounds.
Yeah.
And while Jesse was there, actually, I came up with the string sound that that really became a part of the show. It was totally based on Jesse's prompting. I had showed him some of these chords and ideas I was working on, and he said, what if we push that? Let's do some more of that. And I started working with this very dark string sound, and it became clear pretty early on that this kind of like dark classical zone, like really, wearing that and living with that sound, which I kind of imagined for myself. Maybe that's the sound the Roy family, maybe they imagined that for themselves. Yeah. But I also wanted to make sure it was clear that, I'm not just giving them their own sound. I'm actually trying to make it a little bit like over the top, know. And I purposely would make things a bit like disproportionate. So there's like a huge amount of bass on some of this stuff, and these beats are too big sometimes, and the pianos are out of tune, and the strings are over. It's like everything is like kind of almost like too large for its own good in a way. Exactly. And so I think that was a way when things are serious, the music is serious, but when things are funny, the music gets very serious in this almost like larger than life kind of way. And so that was something that I started working with, and I didn't actually, like I was saying before, like when I worked with Barry, for example, like I didn't know if that would work. That was just an early idea that felt interesting. And interestingly, I was scoring Vice while I was doing season 1 of Succession, and this question of kind of a complex tonal landscape where you have both very, very serious subject matter, and you have very, like satirical subject matter, and incredibly comedic subject matter. That question of how those things work together is a really big question, and it's not obvious. I think it certainly wasn't to me how to approach those things.
Right.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about Vice, because Vice, as you just mentioned, was such a juxtaposition of like this very serious, period in American history, with this figure that was both a villain and a hero to some, and you had to sort of create a musical environment that really captured a lot of these grand emotions.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was your what was satisfying about working on project like that?
I think the scope of Vice was something that was exciting as a challenge. Early on, Barry Adam talked to me about his early ideas for Vice, and actually I was able to go through and look at early drafts of the script with him and talk about that. And one of the instincts that Adam had early on was this idea of a symphonic approach. He thought, the story of Vice is so large that it merited like an equally large scale musical approach. And so one of the things that we started to do is imagine, what would that sound like? What is there an idea of like a symphonic approach that could work with something like Vice? And my early instinct was that you could imagine this symphonic sound, but that there had to be something wrong with it. Yeah. There had to be a dissonance. There had to be something that under the surface we're saying, this looks like a heroic theme, but it's not. It's flawed, know. And so what I would do was in almost every cue in the film, there's some sort of a theme or there's some sort of a piece, and yet there's always notes that are like wrong in those pieces. Mm-hmm. And what I found interesting was that over the course of the film, the notes that felt wrong, actually you get very used to them and they start feeling right. And I think for us that was an interesting metaphor with everything going on in the world too, that we get used to stuff that's wrong. And I think one of the reasons Adam was making this film was he wanted to make sure that we didn't get used to these ideas and make sure that we remember what happened. And so in Vice, I know to Adam, this is the story. It's not just the story of Dick Cheney over the over the past 60 years. It's the story of American history over the past 60 years. So.
Yeah. So outside of your film work, you seem to be involved in a lot of projects. Are there any that you're particularly fond of, or that you particularly like enjoy taking a break from your film work to dive into some of these other things?
There's definitely other things. I've been starting to speak and teach a bit more. I'm this year I'm a creative associate at Juilliard, and I'm helping curate a program where we're exploring the intersections of different arts, let's say, sort of the intersections of drama and music and dance. So I'll be inviting people to come, and we'll be giving presentations to the students from every department in the school. And I'm part of a group called Dakota. I'm on the board, where I help oversee this wonderful group that is the affiliate ensemble of Carnegie Hall, and they have in some ways, I guess you'd say, like a dual mandate, where they perform globally, but also do a lot of interactive performances and outreach work in schools and prisons and hospitals, nursing homes. So I love Dakota because I think they represent kind of like a modern vision of what an artist can do, which is performing, but also really bringing the music to places where music is in short supply. So my wife is a member of Dakota, Caitlin, and what other things? I mean, there's a few things that I feel very close to in that way, but I would also admit that I have not had much time to myself in a while. The past couple of years have been pretty crazy, and I've been immersed. I'm like living in the cave. I'm a very indoors creature.
So you've achieved so much in your career. What do you still struggle with? Like what do you still look to as a challenge that affects anyone at whatever stage they are in their life?
I mean, I think every project is a new challenge, honestly. I think it's not something that it's almost like I feel we shouldn't get used to the work in a way, because I think that keeps it fresh, and I think if I felt fully assured and confident in my abilities at the beginning of every project, I would maybe want to do something else.
Right.
Because I really feel every time like I don't know where we're gonna wind up. I feel I've learned things each time. I think exploring different instrumental combinations, different harmonic universes. Those are all things that are exciting. But I think it's always about pushing yourself and trying to. I work very hard. And I put this pressure on myself that I really want to make sure that every film is its own unique soundscape. And so I think that's a pressure that maybe unnecessarily, so I put it on myself. But I feel, that every movie's its own story, and these characters are their own people, and there's some sound I feel that hopefully can become like its own, inside that fabric in some way. So that's an added pressure / anxiety I guess I have on every project, and also just thinking long term about my own what are our own musical goals, and what are we trying to do. I think I'm always searching for sounds that move me in some way, and exploring my own curiosities in music, I guess. So those are some of the things, but I feel like I still feel I'm learning on every project. I think there are so many things that I would love to explore more. There's instruments I'd love to learn. I mean, I'm a pianist, and I play the piano and I play the pipe organ, but I don't I'd love to learn some other instruments at a much better level than I currently have.
Well, it sounds like you need to take some time off to be able to pursue
which I'd love to pursue that a little bit more. Well,
thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing.
Appreciate it. Good talking to you.
Yeah, you too.